Millionaire adopts abandoned baby. Years later, a Ferrari arrives, and he finally realizes. Jonathan Blackwood stood at the window of his sprawling mansion, gazing out at the manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges that surrounded his estate. At 45, he was the epitome of success, a self-made millionaire who had built his fortune in the cutthroat world of real estate development. His sharp features and piercing green eyes spoke of a man accustomed to getting his way, while his tailored suit and designer watch were silent testaments to his wealth. But for all his material success, Jonathan felt a gnawing emptiness that no amount of money seemed to fill. His pursuit of wealth had come at a cost: 2 failed marriages, estranged relationships with his siblings, and a reputation as a ruthless businessman who would stop at nothing to close a deal. Born into a working-class family in a small Midwest town, Jonathan had always been driven by a desire to escape the financial struggles of his childhood. He had clawed his way to the top through sheer determination and an unyielding work ethic. His parents, both factory workers, had instilled in him the value of hard work, but they had never understood his insatiable ambition. As he climbed the corporate ladder, Jonathan left behind not just his humble beginnings, but also the close-knit family ties that had once defined his life. His older brother, Michael, a high school teacher, rarely spoke to him now, put off by what he saw as Jonathan's greed and arrogance. His younger sister, Emily, a nurse, made occasional attempts to bridge the gap, but her efforts were often met with Jonathan's indifference. Jonathan's personal life was equally barren. His first marriage, to his college sweetheart Sarah, had ended after just 3 years when she could no longer tolerate his 80-hour work weeks and emotional unavailability. His second marriage, to Victoria, a fellow real estate mogul, had been more of a business merger than a love match, and had dissolved amidst bitter recriminations and a very public divorce battle. Now, at the pinnacle of his career, Jonathan found himself alone in his massive mansion, surrounded by expensive art and antiques, but devoid of the warmth of family or genuine friendships. His days were filled with board meetings and property acquisitions, his nights with solitary dinners and restless sleep. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his immaculate lawn, Jonathan felt a familiar sense of restlessness. He had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of in terms of wealth and success, but the satisfaction he had expected to feel remained elusive. Little did Jonathan know that his carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down. In just a few short hours, an unexpected discovery on his doorstep would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, family, and the true meaning of wealth. The evening had started like any other for Jonathan Blackwood. After a long day of meetings and negotiations, he had returned to his mansion, poured himself a glass of expensive scotch, and settled in for another solitary night. The silence of the house, once a welcome respite from the chaos of his business dealings, now seemed oppressive. As he sat in his study, half-heartedly reviewing contracts for his latest development project, Jonathan was startled by the sound of his doorbell. It was unusual for anyone to visit at this hour, especially unannounced. His housekeeper had long since gone home, and he rarely received personal visitors. Frowning, Jonathan made his way to the front door, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He peered through the peephole, but saw no one. Irritated and slightly curious, he opened the door, ready to berate whoever had disturbed his evening. But the sight that greeted him left him speechless. There, on his doorstep, was a wicker basket, and nestled inside, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, was a baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few days old, its tiny face scrunched up in sleep. For a moment, Jonathan stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. He looked up and down the street, searching for some sign of whoever had left the child, but the night was still and empty. With trembling hands, he picked up the basket and brought it inside. As he set it down on the marble foyer floor, he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the blanket. His heart pounding, Jonathan opened the note and read, "Please take care of him. His name is Oliver. I'm sorry, but I have no other choice." The handwriting was shaky, as if written in haste or under great duress. There was no signature, no explanation beyond those 2 brief sentences. As if sensing the turmoil of the moment, the baby Oliver began to stir. His eyes opened, revealing startlingly blue irises that seemed to pierce right through Jonathan. A small, wrinkled hand escaped the confines of the blanket, reaching out as if grasping for something to hold on to. Without thinking, Jonathan extended his finger, and Oliver latched onto it with surprising strength. The simple gesture sent a jolt through Jonathan's body, awakening feelings he had long since buried. For a man accustomed to making split-second decisions involving millions of dollars, Jonathan found himself paralyzed with indecision. His first instinct was to call the police, to hand this unexpected responsibility over to the proper authorities. It was the logical thing to do, a sensible course of action. But as he looked down at Oliver, something stirred within him. The child's vulnerability, his complete dependence on the kindness of others, struck a chord deep within Jonathan's carefully guarded heart. In that moment, memories of his own childhood flooded back. The warmth of his mother's embrace, the proud smile on his father's face when he brought home good grades. He remembered the sense of security he had felt, knowing that no matter what happened, his family would be there for him. It was a feeling he had traded away in his relentless pursuit of wealth and success. Looking at Oliver, Jonathan realized with a pang of regret how much he had lost along the way. As if sensing Jonathan's internal struggle, Oliver began to fuss. The soft whimpers quickly escalated into full-blown cries, the sound echoing through the empty mansion. Instinctively, Jonathan picked up the child, cradling him awkwardly against his chest. "Shh, it's okay," he murmured, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. "You're safe now." The words, spoken almost without thought, seemed to calm Oliver. The baby's cries subsided, replaced by soft coos as he nestled against Jonathan's expensive silk shirt. In that moment, as he stood in his grand foyer holding this tiny, helpless being, Jonathan Blackwood made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't let this child go. "Okay, Oliver," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I guess it's you and me now." As the full impact of his decision began to sink in, Jonathan felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. He, who had never so much as changed a diaper, was now responsible for a newborn's life. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time in years, Jonathan felt truly alive. Little did he know that this unexpected arrival on his doorstep would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, love, and the true meaning of wealth. The journey ahead would be filled with obstacles, revelations, and profound changes, all sparked by this one extraordinary night. In the days following Oliver's arrival, Jonathan's life underwent a seismic shift. The once immaculate mansion became a chaos of baby bottles, diapers, and hastily purchased infant supplies. Jonathan, who had prided himself on his meticulous control over every aspect of his life, found himself navigating a world of midnight feedings and inexplicable crying fits. Despite the challenges, Jonathan threw himself into his new role with the same intensity he had once reserved for business deals. He hired the best nanny he could find, a kind-hearted woman named Maria, who patiently guided him through the basics of childcare. He transformed one of the mansion's many unused rooms into a nursery, sparing no expense to create a safe and comfortable space for Oliver. It was during one of these late-night feedings, as Jonathan cradled Oliver in the quiet of the nursery, that he made a startling discovery. As he gently rocked the baby, his eyes fell on a small birthmark just below Oliver's left ear. The mark was shaped like a crescent moon, faint but distinct. Jonathan froze, his mind racing. He had seen that birthmark before, on someone else, his younger sister, Emily. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Could it be possible? Was Oliver somehow related to him? The timing seemed impossible. He hadn't spoken to Emily in over a year, and he certainly didn't know of any pregnancy. But the birthmark was unmistakable, a family trait that had been passed down for generations. With trembling hands, Jonathan reached for his phone. It was the middle of the night, but he couldn't wait. He dialed Emily's number, praying she would answer. After several rings, a groggy voice came on the line. "Jonathan? What's wrong? It's 3 a.m. "Emily," Jonathan said, his voice catching. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Were you pregnant recently? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Emily finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. How did you find out? Jonathan felt the room spin around him. Oliver, he said softly. He has the family birthmark. Emily, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me? Through tears, Emily began to explain. She had gotten pregnant unexpectedly, and the father had abandoned her when he found out. Ashamed and scared, she had hidden the pregnancy from everyone, including their family. When the baby was born, she had panicked, convinced she couldn't provide for him. In a moment of desperation, she had left him on Jonathan's doorstep, hoping her wealthy brother could give the child the life she couldn't. As Jonathan listened to his sister's story, he felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of love for the tiny being in his arms. Oliver wasn't just some random child left on his doorstep. He was family, his nephew. Emily, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion, I want you to come here, now. We need to talk about this face to face. As he ended the call, Jonathan looked down at Oliver, seeing him with new eyes. The baby gazed back, his blue eyes, Emily's eyes, filled with innocent trust. In that moment, Jonathan made a silent vow. He would protect this child, love him, and in doing so, perhaps find a way to rebuild the family bonds he had neglected for so long. The revelation of Oliver's true identity had shattered Jonathan's carefully constructed world. But as he held his nephew close, he realized that this unexpected twist of fate might just be the key to filling the emptiness that had plagued him for so long. Little did Jonathan know that this discovery was just the beginning. The journey ahead would challenge him in ways he never imagined, forcing him to confront his past, reevaluate his priorities, and rediscover the true meaning of family. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the nursery windows, Jonathan made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. He would not only keep Oliver, but he would also do everything in his power to support Emily and bring their fractured family back together. When Emily arrived at the mansion a few hours later, her eyes red-rimmed from crying and lack of sleep, Jonathan didn't greet her with the anger or judgment she had feared. Instead, he wordlessly handed Oliver to her, watching as mother and child reunited in a tearful embrace. I'm so sorry, Emily sobbed, cradling Oliver close. I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. Jonathan placed a comforting hand on his sister's shoulder. It's okay, Em, we're gonna figure this out together. You and Oliver, you're not alone anymore. Over the next few hours, as Oliver slept peacefully in his crib, Jonathan and Emily talked more openly than they had in years. Emily shared the full story of her pregnancy, the father's abandonment, and her fears about raising a child alone. Jonathan listened, realizing with a pang of guilt how little he had known about his sister's life. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Jonathan laid out his plan. Emily and Oliver would move into the mansion. He would provide for them financially, ensuring that Oliver would want for nothing. More importantly, he committed to being present as a brother and an uncle, to rebuilding the family bonds that had been strained by years of neglect. Emily was hesitant at first, wary of becoming dependent on her brother's charity. But Jonathan was insistent. This isn't charity, Em. This is family. We've been apart for too long. Let me do this for all of us. With tears in her eyes, Emily agreed. The consequences of Jonathan's decision were immediate and far-reaching. His carefully ordered life was thrown into joyful chaos as Emily and Oliver settled into the mansion. The echoing halls that had once felt oppressively empty now rang with the sounds of a baby's laughter and the warm conversations of reunited siblings. Professionally, Jonathan's decision had significant repercussions. He informed his board of directors that he would be taking a step back from day-to-day operations to focus on his family. The news was met with shock and resistance. Jonathan, be reasonable, argued his CFO, a longtime associate named Richard. You can't just abandon the company. We're in the middle of several major deals. But Jonathan stood firm. I'm not abandoning anything. I'm reprioritizing. The company will continue to thrive, but from now on, my family comes first. As he had anticipated, there was fallout from his decision. Some investors pulled out, nervous about the company's future, without Jonathan's full attention. The stock price took a hit, and there were whispers in the business world about Blackwood losing his edge. But for the first time in years, Jonathan found that he cared less about the bottom line than he did about the happiness he felt when he came home to Emily and Oliver. The joy of watching his nephew grow, of rediscovering his relationship with his sister, far outweighed any financial setbacks. The changes in Jonathan's personal life were equally profound. He reached out to his older brother Michael, extending an olive branch after years of estrangement. The first few conversations were awkward, laden with old resentments and misunderstandings. But gradually, as Michael witnessed the changes in his younger brother, the ice began to thaw. Jonathan's parents, initially skeptical of his sudden transformation, were won over by their grandson's charm and their son's genuine efforts to reconnect. Family dinners, once a rarity, became a weekly occurrence, filled with laughter, love, and the healing of old wounds. However, not all the consequences were positive. Some of Jonathan's old business associates, accustomed to his cutthroat tactics and single-minded focus on profit, began to distance themselves. They saw his new family-oriented approach as a weakness, a softening of the hard edge that had made him successful. Jonathan also struggled to balance his new family responsibilities with the demands of his company. There were nights when he found himself on conference calls while trying to soothe a fussy Oliver. Days when he missed important meetings because of doctor's appointments or family emergencies. The learning curve was steep, and there were moments of doubt when Jonathan wondered if he had made the right choice. But then he would look at Oliver's innocent face or see the gratitude in Emily's eyes, and he knew that no business success could compare to the fulfillment he felt as a brother and uncle. As the months passed, Jonathan's decision continued to shape his life in unexpected ways. He found himself reevaluating every aspect of his existence, from his business practices to his personal relationships. The man who had once valued nothing but the bottom line was learning to appreciate the intangible riches of family, love, and genuine connection. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges to face, sacrifices to make, and difficult decisions to navigate. This personal growth didn't go unnoticed. Employees who had once feared Jonathan now respected and admired him. Business partners found him more approachable and were more willing to collaborate on innovative projects. Even his competitors had to acknowledge the positive changes in both Jonathan and his company. As Oliver grew from a baby to a toddler, Jonathan's life settled into a new rhythm. Family dinners became a nightly ritual, with Emily, Michael, and often their parents gathered around the table. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, swimming lessons, and impromptu dance parties in the living room. The mansion, once a symbol of Jonathan's solitary success, became a hub of familial love and laughter. Yet, even as he embraced this new life, Jonathan remained aware of the complexities of their situation. He knew that one day, Oliver would have questions about his biological father. Emily still struggled with feelings of guilt and inadequacy. And there was always the possibility that their newfound family harmony could be disrupted by unforeseen challenges. But for now, Jonathan was committed to nurturing the precious bonds he had rediscovered. As he tucked Oliver into bed each night, reading stories and singing lullabies he remembered from his own childhood, he felt a sense of peace and purpose that no business success had ever provided. The man who had once measured his worth by the size of his bank account now found his greatest joy in the simple moments of family life. And though he didn't know it yet, the greatest test of his newfound values was still to come, in the form of a sleek Ferrari and a mysterious visitor who would force Jonathan to confront the consequences of his past actions and the true meaning of family. As Jonathan settled into his new role as a family man, a secondary plot began to unfold, centered around his company, Blackwood Developments. The shift in Jonathan's priorities and business approach had sent ripples through the corporate world, attracting both admiration and skepticism. Amanda Chen, a brilliant young executive who had recently joined the company, found herself increasingly intrigued by the changes she was witnessing. She had been drawn to Blackwood Developments by its reputation for innovation, but the company she encountered was far different from what she had expected. Where she had anticipated a cutthroat environment driven solely by profit, Amanda instead found a workplace that was beginning to prioritize work-life balance and community impact alongside financial success. She watched with fascination as Jonathan navigated board meetings with a toddler on his lap or rescheduled million-dollar negotiations to attend Oliver's preschool recital. But as Jonathan watched Oliver take his first tentative steps across the living room floor, his sister cheering encouragingly, he knew he had made the right choice. The consequences of Jonathan's decision rippled through every aspect of his life. His once meticulously organized schedule now revolved around Oliver's needs and Emily's work shifts at the local hospital. Board meetings were sometimes conducted via video call while he played with Oliver in the background. The mansion, once a showcase of expensive art and antiques, was gradually transformed into a warm family home, with toys scattered across Persian rugs and finger paintings adorning the walls alongside priceless masterpieces. Jonathan's approach to business also underwent a significant shift. Inspired by his experiences with Emily and Oliver, he began to steer his company towards more family-friendly developments. He initiated projects for affordable housing and invested in community centers and childcare facilities. These moves, while initially met with skepticism from his board, gradually began to pay off both financially and in terms of the company's public image. However, the transition wasn't always smooth. There were times when Jonathan found himself overwhelmed by the demands of his new life. Sleepless nights with a teething Oliver left him exhausted during important negotiations. The emotional labor of rebuilding family relationships sometimes drained him more than the most intense business dealings ever had. There were also moments of self-doubt. On particularly challenging days when Oliver was throwing tantrums and Emily was stressed about her nursing studies, Jonathan would find himself questioning his abilities as a caregiver and family man. The skills that had made him a titan in the business world didn't always translate to the nuanced challenges of family life. Yet for every difficult moment, there were countless joys that reaffirmed Jonathan's decision. The first time Oliver called him Uncle Johnny, the pride in Emily's voice when she passed her nursing exams, the warm conversations with Michael as they rebuilt their brotherly bond, these moments were priceless in a way that Jonathan's millions could never match. As news of Jonathan's change in priorities spread, he found his personal and professional circles shifting. Some old associates, unable to understand his new focus on family, drifted away. But in their place, Jonathan found himself forming new relationships with people who shared his values of family and community. Perhaps the most profound consequence of Jonathan's decision was the change in himself. The hard-edged businessman began to soften, rediscovering the capacity for empathy and compassion that he had suppressed for so long. He found himself genuinely interested in the lives of his employees, implementing family-friendly policies that boosted morale and productivity. Inspired by this new approach, Amanda began to spearhead initiatives that aligned with Jonathan's vision of socially responsible development. She proposed a project to convert an abandoned factory into a mixed-use space that would include affordable housing, a community center, and green spaces. However, not everyone at Blackwood Developments shared Amanda's enthusiasm for the company's new direction. Richard Hawthorne, the CFO who had been with the company since its early days, viewed the changes with growing alarm. He saw Jonathan's focus on family and community as a threat to the company's bottom line and began to quietly maneuver to protect what he saw as the company's true interests. Richard began holding clandestine meetings with board members and major shareholders, expressing his concerns about Jonathan's leadership. He pointed to the initial dip in stock prices and the loss of some high-profile clients as evidence that the company was headed in the wrong direction. As this power struggle unfolded behind the scenes, Jonathan remained largely unaware. His attention divided between his family and the aspects of the business he found most fulfilling. He threw his support behind Amanda's mixed-use project, seeing it as a perfect embodiment of his new business philosophy. The project quickly became a point of contention within the company. Amanda and her team worked tirelessly to bring the vision to life, while Richard and his allies sought ways to undermine it, arguing that it was too risky and not profitable enough. This internal conflict came to a head during a crucial board meeting. As Amanda presented the final plans for the mixed-use development, Richard launched into a scathing critique, armed with figures that seemed to show the project would be a financial disaster. The boardroom erupted into heated debate. Jonathan, caught off guard by the vehemence of the opposition, found himself struggling to defend the project and his broader vision for the company. It was a stark reminder that not everyone shared his newfound perspective on the balance between profit and social responsibility. As the meeting ended in a stalemate, Jonathan realized that he had perhaps been naive in thinking that his personal transformation would seamlessly translate to his entire company. He had underestimated the resistance to change within the corporate world he had once dominated. This setback forced Jonathan to reevaluate his approach. He knew he couldn't simply impose his new values on the company. He would need to find a way to bridge the gap between his old business acumen and his new priorities. As he left the boardroom that day, Jonathan was already formulating a plan. He would need to become more actively involved in the day-to-day operations of the company, to lead by example rather than decree. And he would need allies, people like Amanda, who shared his vision and could help implement it effectively. Little did Jonathan know that this corporate power struggle was about to intersect with his personal life in an unexpected way. The forces he was contending with at work would soon spill over into his carefully reconstructed family life, challenging everything he had built over the past few years. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Jonathan to defend not just his business philosophy, but the very family he had come to cherish. And it would all begin with the arrival of a Ferrari and a mysterious visitor at his door. As the years passed, the relationships within Jonathan's newfound family continued to evolve and deepen. The bond between Jonathan and Oliver grew stronger with each passing day. What had begun as an unexpected responsibility had blossomed into a profound love that Jonathan had never known he was capable of feeling. Every morning, Jonathan would wake up early to have breakfast with Oliver before heading to work. These quiet moments, filled with Oliver's chatter about his dreams and his plans for the day, became the cornerstone of Jonathan's day. He found himself looking forward to these conversations more than any business meeting. Jonathan's relationship with Emily also underwent a significant transformation. The initial awkwardness and guilt had given way to a deep, supportive sibling bond. They found themselves sharing late-night conversations, reminiscing about their childhood and discussing their hopes for Oliver's future. Emily's strength and resilience in the face of single motherhood continually amazed Jonathan, and he felt a growing admiration for the woman his little sister had become. One evening, as they sat on the patio watching Oliver play in the garden, Emily turned to Jonathan with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, "for everything you've done for us." Jonathan shook his head, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "You don't need to thank me, Em. This has given me more than I could have ever imagined. You and Oliver, you've made me a better man." The reconciliation with their older brother Michael was a slower, more gradual process. Years of misunderstandings and resentment couldn't be erased overnight. But as Michael witnessed the changes in Jonathan, saw the love he had for Oliver and the effort he was making to rebuild their family, the ice between them began to thaw. It was Oliver who ultimately bridged the gap between the brothers. Michael, a history teacher, found himself drawn in by Oliver's curiosity and love of stories. He began visiting more frequently, regaling Oliver with tales of ancient civilizations and historical heroes. Watching his brother and nephew bond, Jonathan felt a warmth he had long forgotten. During one of these visits, as Oliver napped after a particularly exciting story about the Roman Empire, Michael turned to Jonathan. "You know," he said hesitantly, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm proud of you, little brother. What you've done for Emily and Oliver, it's incredible." Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you," he managed to say. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what really matters." As the brothers embraced, years of tension and hurt began to melt away. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of disagreement and old habits that died hard, but it was a start. Jonathan's parents, initially skeptical of his sudden transformation, were gradually won over by the obvious changes in their son and the joy that Oliver brought into their lives. Family gatherings, once fraught with tension and unspoken resentments, became warm, laughter-filled affairs. Even Jonathan's ex-wives found themselves re-evaluating their opinions of him. Sarah, his first wife, reached out after hearing about Oliver. While there was no rekindling of romantic feelings, they were able to establish a friendly rapport that would have been unthinkable in the past. Victoria, his second ex-wife and fellow real estate mogul, was more reluctant to accept the changes in Jonathan. But even she had to admit, during a chance encounter at a charity gala, that he seemed happier and more at peace than she had ever seen him. As Oliver grew, so did the network of relationships around him. Jonathan found himself forming friendships with other parents at Oliver's school, people he would never have associated with in his previous life. He discovered a sense of community that had been sorely lacking in his pursuit of wealth and status. However, the development of these relationships wasn't without its challenges. Jonathan sometimes struggled to navigate the complex dynamics of co-parenting with Emily, especially as Oliver grew older and began asking questions about his biological father. There were disagreements about parenting styles, about the balance between providing for Oliver and not spoiling him, about how much of their family history to share with him. Yet, even in these moments of tension, Jonathan found a richness and depth to his life that he had never experienced before. The man who had once valued business deals above all else now found his greatest satisfaction in a family dinner, a heartfelt conversation, or the simple act of tucking Oliver into bed at night. As these relationships continued to grow and evolve, Jonathan felt more grounded and fulfilled than ever before. But he was also aware that the harmony they had achieved was delicate. The shadows of the past still loomed, and unanswered questions remained. Little did Jonathan know that all of these carefully nurtured relationships were about to be put to the test. The arrival of an unexpected visitor would soon force him to confront the consequences of his past actions and fight to protect the family he had come to cherish above all else. The day that would change everything started like any other. Jonathan was in his home office, reviewing plans for Amanda's mixed-use development project while keeping an ear out for Oliver playing in the next room. The warm afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the family photos that now adorned his desk. The sound of a high-performance engine cut through the peaceful atmosphere. Jonathan looked up, mildly curious. It wasn't unusual for luxury cars to pass by his mansion, but something about this one made him pause. The engine cut off, followed by the slam of a car door. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Jonathan heard Maria, their housekeeper, answer the door, followed by a brief, muffled conversation. Then, Maria's voice called out, sounding slightly uncertain, "Mr. Blackwood? There's someone here to see you." Jonathan made his way to the foyer, Oliver trailing curiously behind him. As he rounded the corner, he froze. Standing in the entryway was a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his posture radiating confidence and barely contained anger. Behind him, visible through the open door, was a gleaming red Ferrari. The man's eyes locked onto Jonathan, a mix of emotions flashing across his face: recognition, resentment, and something that looked almost like fear. "Hello, Jonathan," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "It's been a long time." With a jolt, Jonathan recognized him. Robert Callahan, his former protege and business partner, the man he had ruthlessly ousted from their company 5 years ago in a move that had cemented Jonathan's reputation as a cutthroat businessman. "Robert," Jonathan managed, his mind racing. "What are you doing here?" Robert's eyes flickered to Oliver, who was peeking out from behind Jonathan's legs. "I think you know why I'm here," he said coldly. "We need to talk, privately." The tension in the air was palpable. Maria, sensing the gravity of the situation, quickly ushered Oliver away despite his protests. Jonathan led Robert to his study, his heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and apprehension. As soon as the door closed behind them, Robert's composure cracked. "How could you?" he hissed. "All these years, I've been trying to rebuild what you destroyed. And now I find out that not only have you been playing happy families, but that child, he's mine, isn't he?" Jonathan felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but even as the words left his mouth, a horrible realization began to dawn on him. Robert pulled out a folder and slapped it down on the desk. Inside were photos of Emily, of Oliver, of their family outings. Along with the photos were DNA test results. "I hired a private investigator," Robert spat. "When I saw the boy's age, I knew. Emily and we had a brief relationship right before you forced me out. She never told me she was pregnant." Jonathan's mind was reeling. Oliver, the child he had come to love as his own, was actually Robert's son. The implications were staggering. "Robert," he began, but was cut off. "Save it," Robert snarled. "I'm not here for your excuses. I'm here for my son, and I'm going to take him and your company and everything you've built. It's time you learned what it feels like to lose everything." As the full weight of Robert's words sank in, Jonathan felt a surge of fear and desperation unlike anything he had ever experienced. The family he had come to cherish, the life he had built, the redemption he had found, it was all suddenly hanging by a thread. In that moment, Jonathan knew he was facing the fight of his life. Not for his wealth or his company, but for the family he loved more than anything in the world. The climactic confrontation that would determine the future of everything he held dear had begun. The tension in Jonathan's study was palpable as he faced Robert, the man he had once betrayed and who now threatened everything he held dear. For a moment, Jonathan was tempted to fall back on his old tactics, to threaten, to manipulate, to do whatever it took to protect his interests. But as he thought of Oliver, of the man he had become over the past few years, he knew he had to find another way. "Robert," Jonathan began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil, "I understand your anger. What I did to you was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. But this isn't about us anymore. It's about Oliver." Robert's eyes flashed with fury. "Don't you dare pretend to care about him now. You've kept him from me for years." "I didn't know he was yours," Jonathan said quietly. "But that doesn't change the fact that I love him as my own. He's a remarkable boy, Robert, and he deserves better than to be caught in the middle of our past mistakes." For a moment, Robert seemed taken aback by Jonathan's sincerity, but his anger quickly reasserted itself. "Love him? You don't know the meaning of the word. You're incapable of loving anyone but yourself." Jonathan felt a flash of his old temper, but he forced it down. This wasn't about his pride anymore. "You're wrong," he said firmly. "Oliver, Emily, my family, they've taught me what real love is. And that's why I'm asking you, not as a businessman or a rival, but as a father who wants what's best for his child. Let's find a way to resolve this that doesn't hurt Oliver." Robert scoffed, but Jonathan pressed on. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to like me, but I am asking you to think about what's best for Oliver. He has a stable home, a family who loves him, friends at school. Uprooting him now, subjecting him to a bitter custody battle, is that really what you want for your son?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Robert's face. "What are you proposing?" he asked warily. Jonathan took a deep breath. "Let's bring in a mediator. Someone impartial who can help us figure out a way forward that puts Oliver's needs first. We can arrange supervised visits for you to get to know him, and if you're open to it, we can look at ways for you to be involved in his life long term." Robert was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with conflicting emotions. "And the company?" he finally asked. Jonathan nodded, having anticipated this. "I'm willing to discuss that too. There might be a way for us to work together again, to build something even better than what we had before. But that has to be separate from Oliver. He's not a bargaining chip." The tension in the room slowly began to ease as Robert considered Jonathan's words. It was clear that he had come expecting a fight, not a reasonable discussion. "I need time to think," he said at last. "Of course," Jonathan agreed. "But while you're thinking, I'd like to introduce you to Oliver. Not as his biological father, not yet, but as a friend of the family. Let you see for yourself what a wonderful boy he is." Robert hesitated, then nodded. As they left the study, Jonathan called for Emily. When she arrived, her face pale with worry, Jonathan quickly explained the situation. To his surprise and gratitude, Emily handled the news with remarkable grace. "Oliver has always known he was adopted," she told Robert softly. We've never hidden that from him. But he also knows that family is about more than blood. It's about love and choice. As if on cue, Oliver came bounding into the room, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. "Uncle Johnny, Mom? Who's this?" he asked, looking curiously at Robert. Jonathan knelt down to Oliver's level. "This is Mr. Callahan, an old friend of mine. He'd like to get to know you if that's okay." Oliver, with the openness of a child, smiled brightly at Robert. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Callahan. Do you want to see my tree house? Uncle Johnny and I built it together." As Robert allowed himself to be led outside by the enthusiastic child, Jonathan and Emily exchanged a look of cautious hope. The situation was far from resolved, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Robert became a frequent visitor to the Blackwood mansion. His initial anger gradually gave way to a genuine desire to know his son. Jonathan, true to his word, arranged for a mediator to help them navigate the complex situation. There were difficult conversations and moments of tension. The years of resentment between Jonathan and Robert couldn't be erased overnight. But as they watched Oliver thrive, both men found themselves willing to put aside their differences for his sake. Emily, showing remarkable strength and compassion, became the bridge between the two men. She shared stories of Oliver's early years with Robert, helping him feel connected to the son he hadn't known. At the same time, she reassured Jonathan of his place in Oliver's life, reminding him that love, not biology, made a family. As for Oliver, he adapted to the changes with the resilience of youth. He quickly grew fond of Mr. Callahan, delighting in the stories Robert shared of his travels and business adventures. Yet his bond with Jonathan remained as strong as ever, his love for his Uncle Johnny undiminished by the revelation of his biological father's identity. The resolution was far from perfect. There were still legal matters to be settled, decisions to be made about Oliver's future, and a delicate balance to be maintained. But as the weeks turned into months, a new kind of family began to take shape, one built on forgiveness, compromise, and a shared love for a remarkable little boy. Jonathan knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The conflict with Robert had forced him to confront the consequences of his past actions in a way he never had before. But as he watched Oliver play with both himself and Robert, laughing and carefree, he felt a sense of hope. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events wasn't just a challenge to be overcome, but an opportunity for all of them to grow, to heal, and to build something even more meaningful than what they had before. The resolution of the conflict with Robert marked a significant turning point in Jonathan's life, setting him and his family on a new path. The experience had forced Jonathan to confront not just his past mistakes, but also the man he had become and the values he now held dear. One sunny afternoon, as Jonathan watched Oliver playing in the garden with both himself and Robert, he made a decision that would shape their future. He called a family meeting, including not just Emily and Oliver, but also Robert, Michael, and their parents. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Jonathan began, once everyone was settled in the living room, "about our family, about the company, about the kind of legacy I want to leave behind. And I've realized that it's time for a change." He outlined his plan. He would step down as CEO of Blackwood Developments, taking on a role as chairman of the board instead. This would allow him to focus more on family and on the philanthropic initiatives he had become passionate about. To everyone's surprise, he suggested that Robert take over as CEO, with Amanda as his second-in-command. "Robert, you were always a brilliant businessman," Jonathan said, looking his former rival in the eye. "And Amanda has a vision for the company that I think could take us in an exciting new direction. Together, I believe you could build something truly remarkable." The room was silent for a moment as everyone processed this unexpected proposal. Robert, in particular, seemed stunned. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. Jonathan nodded. "I am. It's time for me to make amends for the past and focus on what really matters. And I think this could be a fresh start for all of us." The discussion that followed was long and at times heated. There were concerns to address, details to work out, and old wounds that needed healing. But by the end of the day, a tentative agreement had been reached. This decision marked the beginning of a new chapter for the entire family. Jonathan threw himself into his philanthropic work, using his wealth and influence to make a real difference in the community. He also dedicated more time to Oliver, relishing his role as a father figure alongside Robert. Emily, inspired by Jonathan's change, decided to start a nonprofit organization focused on supporting single parents. Michael became more involved in the family business, offering his perspective as an educator to help shape the company's community outreach programs. As for Oliver, he thrived in the love and attention of his expanded family. The boy who had once been left on a doorstep now had two fathers, a mother, and a large extended family, all dedicated to his happiness and well-being. This turning point represented more than just a change in career or family dynamics. It was a fundamental shift in values, priorities, and the very definition of success. As Jonathan embarked on this new direction, he felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that he had never experienced in his years of corporate climbing. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with new challenges and opportunities. But for the first time, Jonathan was excited about the journey, not just the destination. He had found something far more valuable than wealth or power. He had found a true home in the family he had built, and a legacy of love and compassion that would far outlast any business empire. As the months passed, following the dramatic changes in both his personal and professional life, Jonathan found himself in a period of profound reflection and personal growth. The man who had once measured his worth solely by his business achievements was learning to value different metrics of success. One crisp autumn morning, Jonathan sat on the porch of his mansion, watching Oliver play with his new puppy in the yard. Robert was there too, having stopped by for their now regular weekend breakfast. As Jonathan observed the easy interaction between Robert and Oliver, he marveled at how far they had all come. "You know," Robert said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad things turned out the way they did. Even with everything." Jonathan nodded, understanding the complexity of emotions behind Robert's words. "I know what you mean. It's not the family any of us expected, but it's ours." This unconventional family unit had taught Jonathan more about love, forgiveness, and personal growth than he had ever thought possible. He had learned patience from Oliver's endless questions and boundless energy. He had learned humility from having to work alongside Robert, the man he had once wronged so deeply. And he had learned the true meaning of unconditional love from Emily's unwavering support through all the changes and challenges. Jonathan's growth wasn't limited to his personal life. In his new role as chairman of the board, he found himself approaching business decisions with a newfound perspective. The cutthroat tactics that had once been his trademark were replaced by a more balanced approach that considered not just profits, but the impact on employees, placed the community, and the environment. He thought back to the man he had been when he first found Oliver on his doorstep. Driven, successful, but ultimately unfulfilled. The journey from that moment to now had been filled with challenges, mistakes, and moments of doubt. But it had also brought him a joy and a sense of purpose he had never known before. The philanthropic work that had once been little more than a tax write-off had become a true passion. Jonathan found himself energized by the opportunity to use his wealth and influence to make a real difference in people's lives. He had started a foundation focused on supporting single parents and at-risk youth, inspired by Emily's experiences and Oliver's story. Even his relationship with his own parents had undergone a transformation. The distance that had grown between them over years of single-minded career focus had been bridged by shared love for Oliver and a newfound appreciation for family bonds. Family dinners, once a rarity, were now a weekly event filled with laughter, love, and the healing of old wounds. As Oliver ran up to him, puppy in tow demanding that Uncle Johnny come play, Jonathan felt a surge of emotion. This child, who had entered his life so unexpectedly, had been the catalyst for a complete reinvention of himself and his values. "You've got that look again," Robert observed with a half-smile. "The one that says you're getting sentimental in your old age." Jonathan laughed, not bothering to deny it. "Maybe I am, but you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way." As he allowed himself to be pulled into a game of catch, Jonathan reflected on the incredible journey of the past few years. The man who had once valued nothing but the bottom line had learned to appreciate the intangible riches of family, love, and genuine connection. The growth he had undergone, from ruthless CEO to devoted uncle and compassionate leader, was just the beginning. There was still so much to learn, so many ways to improve. But for the first time in his life, Jonathan was excited about the journey, not just the destination. As he played with Oliver, laughing alongside Robert, Jonathan felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance at life, at family, at leaving a legacy that truly mattered. And he was determined to make the most of it, every single day. As the sun began to set on another day filled with family, laughter, and love, Jonathan stood at the window of his study, watching Oliver say goodbye to Robert. The sight of his nephew, for that's what Oliver would always be to him, regardless of biology, hugging the man who was both his biological father and Jonathan's former rival, was a powerful reminder of how far they had all come. The journey that had begun with a newborn left on his doorstep had led Jonathan down a path he could never have imagined. It had taught him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the love of family, the strength of relationships, and the positive impact one could have on others' lives. The themes that had defined his transformation resonated strongly in this moment. The power of second chances, the importance of forgiveness, and the transformative nature of love were all embodied in the unconventional family they had built. As Oliver ran back towards the house, his face lit up with joy. Jonathan was struck by a profound realization. The legacy he would leave behind wasn't the business empire he had built, but the lives he had touched, the relationships he had nurtured, and the love he had both given and received. The Ferrari that had once seemed like a harbinger of doom now stood in the driveway as a symbol of reconciliation and new beginnings. It was a reminder that even the most unexpected and challenging events could lead to growth and positive change if approached with an open heart and a willingness to evolve. As Jonathan scooped Oliver up into a hug, he silently renewed his commitment to this new life he had built. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them not as the isolated, driven man he once was, but as a person surrounded by love, guided by compassion, and dedicated to making a difference in the world. The transformation was complete, but the journey was far from over. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan was truly looking forward to every step of the way.